We're seeing the advancement of clean tech. You've got power generation, and on the ground, that means you're seeing wind and solar farms, solar panels on the rooftops. And then we talk about transportation. You can see the penetration of electric vehicles rising throughout the country because electric vehicles have green license plates versus the regular blue. In the big cities, Shanghai, Beijing, Hangzhou, you'd expect to see, 50% or more, I think, when you look around. You can see with your own eyes on the ground a clean tech transition.
How has China added so much green energy to its grid in such a short time?
The entire grid system's needs are growing all the time, right? So China's efforts don't have to be purely substitutive when it adds wind and solar plants. It's adding wind and solar in an effort to just soak up all the new demand that is being created every year. There's so much new consumption need every year. So when you add wind and solar, you're not saying, can I beat this existing generation source? Can I kick that generator out so I can put my wind and solar in the mix instead? You're just saying, of all the things that could be built to meet growing consumption this year or next year or the year after, what can I use? What are my options? And then under that type of framework, it's a lot easier to think about additive wind and solar. And then you say, well, you have to make it make sense economically. We have to make sure that the producers of equipment are able to make money when they sell their equipment. We have to make sure that the builders of power plants, generators or owners are making money when they're selling green electricity. And so far, the policy and the market environment working together has been very effective at a very large scale, ensuring that everybody in that value chain is seeing their incentive need satisfied. China is very large. If you consider you have every single province is about the size of a good sized European country, you say, 30 plus European countries of green electricity additions, it's a lot. But considering how large the country it is and how much more electricity they need every year, it's a reasonable amount of wind and solar.
Why is China's energy demand expanding?
You've got your industrial, which is by far the largest segment in China. And then you've got your commercial or services and your residential. Commercial and residential are roughly same size, order of magnitude. And then industrial is larger than the other two combined. Industrial power demand keeps growing, and industrial power demand is driven by economic activity in the industrial power sector. Most growth in electricity use in the industrial sector can be directly attributed to more activity in the industrial sector. A little bit to the weather, right? When it's hotter, yes, even factories need to turn on the AC more often, but most of that growth is from growth in industrial activity in energy intensive segments, in your steel, your petrochemicals, your metals refining, data centers. All of these use a lot of electricity. Commercial segment is driven partially by the weather and partially by economic activity. In the commercial segment, we're talking about shopping malls and restaurants and hotels, right? They have to run air conditioners. That uses a lot of electricity. But also when you have more economic activity happening, more hotel rooms are being rented, more shops are opening in malls, they all have to use more energy. And then you get to the residential sector. Residential sector electricity use is mostly driven by access to electricity initially. But China's electrification rate is pretty much at 100% now. Right? Everybody has access to electricity. We keep seeing electricity use rising in the residential sector, and that's then driven by the weather. It keeps getting hotter. Every year we have more cooling degree days spread throughout the year, and the rising household wealth in China. As people have more money to spend on things, they buy things that use electricity. They buy ACs and bigger refrigerators and things like that. So there's your three segments, and all of them are growing.
What problems is China's power sector facing? How is it approaching these challenges?
So everything that happens in the Chinese power sector right now, you can view through three pillars, whatever metaphor you want to use. So we've got power market liberalization. China's in the process of decentralizing and liberalizing its power market, which means allowing power to be bought and sold on more market principles instead of being policy driven or driven by state mandate, right? What's the appropriate price of electricity? Let the market decide, economic principles. And then you've got power market decarbonization, that we want to try to stop the growth of emissions in the power sector. We want to be able to meet all power consumption growth with clean energy sources, and then also more than just the growth. We actually want to start taking away from some of the existing coal generation and have that replaced by low carbon sources. And then we've got energy security. Energy security is something that comes up when you import a lot of your energy needs. And for China, that means we need to make sure the power supply is abundant and it is affordable. And so how much can we ensure that we are producing domestically, right? Wind and solar, we produce the panels domestically, we produce the turbines domestically, and the sun and the wind is a domestic resource. Nuclear power, well, can we use domestic mined uranium, or do we have to import uranium? Oil and gas, I think we have to import quite a lot of oil and gas. Coal, hey, we can use a lot of domestic coal, but it has other negative externalities like its carbon emissions. So that's the great balance that you have to think about for energy security, ensuring the availability and affordability of the energy, hopefully without compromising on any of your other priorities. Everything else that has to happen within the context of energy security. If you don't satisfy that third pillar, then nothing else makes sense. And balancing all three of those at the same time is very challenging. And sometimes it might be impossible to have all three. If you want to keep power prices at a certain level, well, then maybe somebody can't make money. Maybe renewable generators can't make money at a certain level, so you lose your decarbonization objective. Or maybe you can install a lot of cheap, affordable power, but it's very variable. It's very intermittent, like solar and wind, and so maybe that's a challenge for energy security. So all three of these have to be balanced at the same time. And then bringing it down into more specific, like a tactical level, if you want to push renewable generators into the market and have them only earn market-driven returns instead of some policy-backed number, you have to accept that probably you're going to see some contraction in the renewable sector, that there are going to be fewer wind and solar projects built as everybody tries to figure out, oh, can I make money under this new policy regime? Is it appropriately attractive? And when that happens, oops, can we meet power consumption growth now entirely with low carbon sources? Maybe that means in order to satisfy a liberalization objective, we had to sacrifice our decarbonization objective. It feels a little bit like that's where China might be in 2025. We'll see what capacity growth looks like in 2026, but some policy changes have made it a little bit tricky this year.
What do you find so fascinating about China's economy?
All the different levels of the Chinese economy have broadly been conducting tens of thousands of science experiments over the last few decades about the right way to open up, marketize your economy, and develop your economy, with an emphasis on developing an industrial sector and then modernizing an agricultural sector and then targeting poverty in impoverished regions, right? All of these things are incredibly interesting development objectives for everywhere in the world, not just in China. And when you look around and you see the results coming out of the industrial sector, you see the results coming out of agricultural production, you see the results coming out of a developing domestic economy that is able to support tourism to backwards regions, and you say, well, they haven't gotten here randomly. What can be learned and adapted and adopted elsewhere in the world? How to govern what was essentially a fairly backwards economy just a few decades ago and now has become a world-leading economy. Every time there's some new national level objective that needs to be satisfied, you'll rarely see a high-level document direct provincial governments or municipal governments exactly how to do something, no matter what it is, right? If you're saying, please roll up bad debt in the real estate sector, please encourage battery storage to enter the power market, whatever individual thing it is, even today, the documents that come out at the high level will say, make good efforts to do a good job, promote activities in this area, in principle should not use these methods, but other methods may be explored. Very, very broad wording often. And then you can see right down to the local or municipal levels how the different choices were taken. When some place found a way that seemed to work really well, other places will pay attention, right? They'll try to learn from that place and say, wow, that's a great achievement. We want to do that too. Let us learn. but that was left super open. Should we use state-owned enterprises or private enterprises? The execution was super decentralized. That's what I find so fascinating and interesting about it, is that everywhere I go, I'm not writing a thesis about the master plan about how to do development, but I feel like when I go out there, anytime I go out, take a trip to the countryside or talk to somebody who works at a factory, I feel like I'm getting a little piece of the story, a little piece of the puzzle. I'm learning either a part of the science experiment that failed or a part of the science experiment that worked or something in between. And then I know a little bit more about how development works, hopefully. And then maybe someday I can pass it on.